We are going to discuss the system pushing back against Donald Trump, the Supreme Court ruling, the Department of Education. Josh Hammer is going to join us, break down some legal matters. All that and more coming up on I'm Right. Okay, let's talk about this Supreme Court ruling, but I'll get to that in a moment, because now that everything has to be about World War II, I thought it would be helpful to maybe bring up a little World War II fact most people do not know. So here's one for you. Why did Japan surrender? Most people will say 2 atomic bombs. We dropped 2 bombs on them, Japan surrendered. And of course, that moved Japan closer to surrender, but that actually is not the main reason Japan surrendered if you read anything from back in the day. The main reason Japan surrendered was the people of Japan were getting ready to revolt against their own government. They were getting ready to rebel. Now, think about that for a moment. In Japan, very different system from ours. Back then, the emperor was a deity, thought to be a god who walked the earth. And yet, the people were taught to worship that god. And yet, the people were getting ready to revolt against the god who ruled over them. What's that lesson have to do with today? Well, the people, no matter what form of government you are in, the people of any nation under a monarchy, a republic, whatever it may be, will not have their will stymied without end. You continue to deny and ignore the will of the people will rise up. It doesn't mean they're going to rise up in 6 months or a year or even 10 years. I'm not putting a time frame on it. You continue to deny people what they want for long enough, the people will rise up. I'm actually going to use somebody who I don't know, but always a Democrat. Stephen A. Smith actually went on The View, because those hags on The View were talking about Donald Trump and Donald Trump's presidency and how, he doesn't have a mandate. And Stephen A. Smith, I thought, laid it out pretty well. Here he was.
What kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why. And I don't mind the question, but let me be very clear. I'm no supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right. That's a mandate. We can sit up there and play around all we want to. In 2020, Trump didn't win the popular vote. He didn't win the electoral college vote. A matter of fact, the Republicans hadn't won the popular vote, if I remember correctly, since 2004. But they did this year. So 20 years after they last won the popular vote, they won the popular vote. They won the electoral college vote. The man won every swing state. And on top of it all, 89% of the counties shifted against. I don't understand how people can look at that and say, there's no mandate. There's a mandate.
Think about that for a moment, because this is going to be about the Supreme Court and the system itself. 89% of the counties in the United States of America. Do you know how many counties there are in the United States of America? And 89% of them, the people in that county, they walked into the voting booth after 4 years of communist rule under Joe Biden, and they said, enough. This madness has to stop. I am voting the opposite way. 89% walked in and said, I have had enough. I am voting for whatever this isn't. I am voting for change. Now let's talk about the Trump presidency, Supreme Court, things like that. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, they're doing a lot of things. It's too much to keep up with. As you know, every single night here, we're chasing down the latest thing they do. But the USAID stuff, USAID, depending on how you want to say it, the exposure of naked corruption and waste inside of the government. You know it all. Trump laid it all out during his speech the other night. You knew it already beforehand. We're sending money to every single country on earth for gay, tranny stuff. You name it, billions, trillions. They're just shelling out money, open, naked corruption, and the spreading of communism, cultural Marxism worldwide with your money. Worldwide. Most Americans, you already knew, but most Americans are waking up and finding out, wait, I was already mad about government corruption, but now I find out, we're figuring out how to tranny mice with my money? Americans are outraged, and this exposure of this stuff is the exact reason 89% of the people went to the polls and said, this has got to stop. I want this to stop. That's what they said. Which brings us to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, courtesy of John Roberts and, of course, that traitorous hag, Amy Coney Barrett, decided that a judge, a lower court judge, was allowed to stop Trump from stopping this money. Trump said, no, this money's not going to be spent on this. This is ridiculous. Stop. We're not doing all this. Some communist judge jumps in, some activist judge put in there by, of course, the Democrats, said, no, you have to continue to fund communism worldwide, which is a ridiculous overstep of any judge's authority. In the Supreme Court, it was thought they were going to step in and say, okay, we have to get the courts under control. No more of this. But that's not what they did. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, no. These lower judges, they are more powerful than the president. Now, this isn't about this case specifically. This case, I'm just using it as an example. But I will say this. Let me preface it by saying, I hate political violence. You know that. If you watch the show for long enough, you understand that civil wars and domestic political violence and stuff, it's the thing I fear the most, to be honest with you. I despise it. It's families hurt. It's our cities, our towns. You don't ever want to live in a world where there's domestic political violence. I don't ever want to live in a world where there's domestic violence all over the place. I don't want to. And I'm in fear of it. And that's why I've encouraged everybody to be as aggressive and active politically now, so we never get to a place where we need that. But if the system is able to deny the will of the voter for the 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, if they are successful in stopping him from doing the reforms they voted for, they voted for these reforms, they wanted the corruption to stop, they wanted the evil to stop. If the system is able to stop them, it's not about stopping Trump, if the system is able to look at the voter and say, what you want? No. At the end of Donald Trump's presidency, we will be closer to political violence in this country than we ever have at any point since the Civil War in this country. That is a fact. Because the American people will understandably take that as your vote doesn't matter. Vote in whoever you want. We still rule over you, and we won't let you make any changes. If you tell people in any country, under any system of government, you tell people that you won't allow them to make changes at the ballot box, they will make changes by other means, if you will. Just think it's helpful to remember that. Now, let's move on and talk about a couple things that happened today. This Department of Education stuff. It was, of course, reported, Wall Street Journal, that Donald Trump planned on eliminating the Department of Education. He's been talking about this forever.
The Department of Education's a big con job.
I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department. So we're ranked number 40 out of 40 schools, right? We're ranked number 1 in cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world. And we're ranked at the bottom of the list. We're ranked very badly. And what I want to do is let the states run schools. I believe strongly in school choice. But in addition to that, I want the states to run schools. And I want Linda to put herself out of a job.
He's dead right on that. And good for Donald Trump. Now, Caroline Leavitt came out earlier today and said, no, Donald Trump is not eliminating the Department of Education. Why, though? Not because he doesn't want to. He does want to, because you can't do that by executive order. Linda McMahon, the head of the DOE, can't even do that. She doesn't have the ability to do that. This is one of those things that must be done by Congress itself. We continue to ask Trump to do things Congress must do. Well, why isn't Congress doing those things? Because we sit at home during primary elections and keep sending the same rhino losers back to D.C. who will never do it. Now, all that aside, Education, speaking of the system. As we've said, there are two central pillars that hold up American communism. The first is one we already touched on, their ability to take your money and fund their revolution with it. They've figured out a way to worm their way through every bit of the government and send your money to fund their revolution. The second pillar is their ability to educate your children with freaks like this.
Hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a high school math teacher and I have a pride flag in my classroom. My job is to teach students math, but it's significantly more than just that. Some of the students that I teach might not have liked their previous math teachers, might not know how to learn math, may have never even passed a math class before. So much of my job is building an atmosphere and a persona that the students feel comfortable learning from me. Because with everyone, especially high school students, learning is scary. Failure is tough. And failure is required to learn. I'm asking my students to be vulnerable with their failures. And in order for them to be vulnerable, they have to feel safe. The pride flag is one of the many ways that I show my kids, regardless of who they are, that you are safe in my class. That no matter who you are, who you love, where you come from, you're welcome here. So yeah, I think that makes sense.
Handing our children over to the communists to be destroyed by things like that is a big reason why we are where we are as a country. We have a mountain to climb, many, many mountains to climb. Destroying the Department of Education is just one of many. But this is why I tell you, we can't just show up for elections when Donald Trump is on the ballot. We can't dust off that MAGA hat once every 4 years and save a country. It doesn't work that way. We have 1,000 battles we still must fight and must win. All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right. Now, we have a huge show for you. We'll talk a bit more about this in just a moment. Before we do that, let me talk to you about my watch. Wasson watch. I love it. You see, Wasson is, well, they're near to my heart, to be honest with you. I fell in love with Wasson, the company, actually, before I even got a watch on my wrist. Because I can't find another watch company out there that is willing to speak out on behalf of things like unborn babies. What kind of watch company takes part in culture wars on our behalf? Oh, I know all the rest of them have their pride flags up, but why would they do that? Because Paul is a Marine. Because they believe that what they do is more than just watches, high-quality watches. They have a calling before God to defend this country, defend the unborn, to speak out on behalf of what is good. How cool is that for a watch company? And the watches are obviously extremely nice. Do you want 10% off a Wasson watch? It's your next gift, putting your money where your morals are. WassonWatch.com code Jesse gets you 10% off. We'll be back.
The bottom line is because it's not working. Department of Education was set up in 1980, and since that time we have spent almost $1 trillion, and we have watched our performance scores continue to go down. I do believe that it is a responsibility to make sure that our children do have equal access to excellent education. I think that that is best handled at the state level, closest to the states, working with state administrators, teachers, parents, who should have input into their curriculum.
It's wild how just common sense all this stuff sounds. With stuff that I would assume virtually every parent would support, right? Joining me now, Corey DeAngelis, Senior Fellow at the American Culture Project, and the great Ryan Walters, Oklahoma State Superintendent. Corey, that message, that's not even a partisan message, or at least it shouldn't be, right? Isn't that something any parent in schools would sign up for?
Exactly. And she's talking about the proposal in Congress right now to send education back to the states. Send that money, block grant it using the Treasury Department back to the states. You have more local control because the Department of Education is an unconstitutional waste of time and money. They have about 4,000 useless bureaucrats in D.C. wasting your hard-earned taxpayer dollars on themselves, not on your education. So we would have more local control if we send this back to the states. And I hope she gets in there and body slams this department once and for all.
Ryan, most of us don't need any help hating the Department of Education, obviously, but you are somebody who actually knows how they work, being as how you're the superintendent in Oklahoma. How does it work? How does the DOE make your life harder or easier? What's it look like?
Yeah, let me give you a few examples. You know, one of the things that the Biden administration did very quickly was they started sending out memos that all their grants are going to have DEI in them. So that when you're teaching a kid math or you're talking about how to understand science, you got to now tell them there's 27 genders. You got to be all inclusive, use inclusive language, pronouns, all that nonsense. Then, you know, right when all the conservatives and parents were going, hey, this is going off the rails, don't forget that in the middle of last summer, the Biden administration came out and said, if you don't allow boys in the girls' bathrooms and boys and girls' sports, we're taking every bit of federal funding from you, and we will sue you for using the incorrect pronouns. So us at the federal government will come in, sue teachers, take them out of the classroom for using the wrong gender pronouns. This is the absolute nonsense has been pushed by the Federal Department of Education. Again, while you are 100% right, it is common sense. You are correct, Jesse. The problem is they do not want to give up power because they want to control and indoctrinate your kids. And they know that President Trump doing away with this agency greatly diminishes their power.
Corey, sending the money back to the states and eliminating the Department of Education is something we all cheer for. But it doesn't look like it's going to be as easy as an executive order, right? What does this look like?
That's right. We have limited powers in the executive branch in America, for better, for worse. In this case, it's a little bit for worse because he's trying to reduce government involvement in our lives. Should be a little bit easier for him to do that, but it does require a filibuster-proof majority in the U.S. Senate, which is a 60-vote, 3/5 majority. We only have 53 Republicans in the Senate right now, so I don't see 7 Democrats coming along, but because they're a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers unions who get 99% of the contributions from the teachers unions goes to the Democrat Party. But we did have Randy Weingarten actually on MSNBC recently admitting herself that she believes that education should not be controlled by the federal government, that should be controlled by the states. She basically made a case to abolish the department. And she also said that her members, quote unquote, don't really care all that much about whether there's a federal Department of Education. They just really want the money. Well, if you look at what the bill does, it sends that money back to the states. We'd have more money for education than we had before if you're not wasting as much of it on the bureaucracy. And so, okay, Randy, let's call her bluff, and maybe she'll lobby the Democrats to vote for the bill to return education to the states. I don't see her doing that because she has Trump derangement syndrome, and so do all the Democrats in Congress. And because Trump is supporting it, they're going to act like they have to be against it. But it is a fantastic idea to, it's not like the money's evaporating, which is what's happening right now. It would go back to the states. Any useful entities like the special needs programs, that would move under the Department of Health and Human Services. Things like civil rights protections, that moves under the Department of Justice. So this isn't as crazy of an idea as what the Democrats are trying to make it out to be. It's not as transformative, but it would be beneficial for the individual kids in those states if we had more local control.
Ryan, everybody knows the numbers, and they're sad numbers about what's happened to our education system. Trump talks about them all the time, 40th this, 40th that. How did that happen in a country where we do have so many wonderful teachers? I know so many of them. In a country with this much money, we have the money for the textbooks, we have the resources, we have resources people around the world would kill for, and yet we're graduating some of the dumbest freaking people in the world. How did this happen?
You know, and I think we lay a lot of this at the feet of the Federal Department of Education. When you look at its creation under Jimmy Carter, you know, what had American education been like before then, right? So we had become the greatest country in the history of the world. We had some of the greatest minds, greatest inventors in world history that came from America. But in the 1970s, we created a Federal Department of Education. By the way, that was an ask from the teachers union. National Teachers Union lobbied Jimmy Carter for it. He puts it in place. And what's happened since? Every academic test score has gone the wrong direction. And then also look at society overall, Jesse. We have teenage suicide record high, teenage drug use record high. Everything has gotten worse as we've allowed federal bureaucrats to manipulate education and turn it into focusing on indoctrination rather than academic performance, rather than making sure that kids are utilizing their God-given talents and not allowing parents to play that lead role in developing their children. I mean, think about the absurdity of this. So if you would have told folks back during the founding era of America that bureaucrats in D.C. would dictate the curriculum inside a one-room schoolhouse at the time with their local teacher, they would have thought that was absurd. Think about the thought process here of where we've come from as a country that believed in individual capability, individual capacity, to one that believes that a bureaucrat in D.C. literally should be telling a teacher in your local schoolhouse how to teach their class and telling parents you have no business in your kid's classroom or your kid's education. We have really reached a crescendo here of absolute absurdity, and thank God for President Trump to put an end to this.
Gentlemen, thank you both. Come back soon, please.
Thank you.
All right. We have so much more to get to. Before we do that, let's talk about sleeping. Let's talk about waking, actually, because that's really how you know you had a good night's sleep. You don't know at midnight, you know in the morning when those eyes flutter open. And I know that taking something to sleep, finding something that'll help you sleep is easy. You can go take cold medication and help you sleep. How do you get a feel when you wake up? You feel horrible. That's what the difference is with dream powder from Beam. When you wake up, you feel great instead of feeling like you're still medicated or something like that, because it's not medication, it's natural stuff. It's a cup of hot chocolate. It's got melatonin and things like that in it. And you just kind of slowly drift off to sleep, and you sleep through the night. You're not tossing and turning, getting up 3 times. And then when you wake up, you just feel ready to go. Want to feel like that every single day? Shopbeam.com/Jesse Kelly. Gets you up to 40% off. We'll be back. Well, Supreme Court screwed us again. Shocker. They tend to do that from time to time. And as I explained in the opening, courts, no courts, whatever the reason is, if the system is able to stop the will of the voter, not Trump's will, the will of the voter, then we are on a very dark path in this country. And I need somebody to make sense of this Supreme Court thing for me. So there's only one place to turn, like I always do. My friend Josh Hammer, host of America on Trial, which I highly recommend you download. Josh, okay, buddy, help me understand, pal. The lower courts, they decided, some vicious little commie judge, that Trump had to spend this and had to spend that, which of course was ridiculous. We all anticipated the Supreme Court would say, get yourself in check, lower court, but they didn't say that, Josh. Tell me what's going on.
All right. So first of all, Jesse, you're totally right that this lower court judge, Amir Ali in Washington, D.C., is a left-wing activist hack. I mean, this is a guy who was literally as partisan a left-wing litigator as it gets. As recently as 6 months ago, he was a very late Biden term judicial nominee, someone who has been pretty public about his aspirations to undermine the legitimacy of the nefarious John Roberts conservative Supreme Court there. So, the fact is kind of psychologically that this judge is speaking the way that he has about the United States Supreme Court, at least in his prejudicial litigator life, which, again, was just like 6 months ago. I mean, the fact that the Chief Justice ruled the way he did in this case, I just find completely remarkable, because John Roberts, over and over again, Jesse, going back for literally decades, back to his first confirmation to the court, I guess 20 years ago now, the one thing that he cares about, for better or for worse, is the perceived legitimacy of the United States Supreme Court. So where you have a lower court judge, Amir Ali in this case, who is as explicit as he is about trying to undermine the legitimacy, it seems to me like the obvious thing to do would be to swat him down and put him in his place there. After all, the United States Supreme Court has the plenary absolute power to stay any lower court ruling in the judiciary that it wants to there. But in this particular case, John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, what they're basically saying, Jesse, here is they're saying that because this was self-styled as a TRO, a temporary restraining order, that therefore it is not necessarily ripe for their review at that time. They're basically waiting for a formal injunction, one of these so-called nationwide injunctions there. So they're basically trying to kind of get out on a procedural leg, but That's not really how it works, because even though you're calling this thing a TRO there, when you continue to extend the so-called temporary restraining order, at some point, Jesse, it ceases to be temporary. At some point, it ceases to be an injunction. You don't have to be a lawyer to figure this out. You can just have some basic common sense there. That's basically in part what Sam Alito says in his very livid and righteously indignant dissent. It's a generally good rule of thumb when it comes to SCOTUS watching, Jesse. When you really tick off Sam Alito, you're probably wrong, because Sam Alito gets righteously indignant when he is correct, and he was correct in this case there. So it's a major setback. It's deeply unfortunate, but they still could do the right thing when the appeal gets to them on the merits, because again, this was kind of a procedural temporary restraining order type thing there. Hopefully that day comes, though, sooner rather than later. That's the big question at this point.
Josh, what's wrong with Amy Coney Barrett? And I could ask the same question about Kavanaugh. Yes, I know Kavanaugh happened to be on the right side of this one, but our judges in general, I mean, John Roberts, we've all just basically given up on John Roberts at this point in time, but that was our guy. Their people never do this. Their people never do this to them. They are reliably leftists every single time. Our people are on, well, I'm not really sure about the whole thing. How do we get these people?
Amy Coney Barrett has been a tremendous disappointment. I mean, we should not mince words there. She's been a tremendous disappointment. She was on the wrong side of the Fisher case, the January 6th case. She joined an absolutely abominable dissenting opinion there. By the way, in that case, the Fisher case, she was on the wrong side. Ketanji Brown Jackson happened to be on the correct side there. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the DEI justice, who was literally picked because she is a black woman. She actually took the correct statutory interpretation stance in the Fisher case, the January 6th J6er case there, in a way that Amy Coney Barrett did not. The mind just totally reels at this stuff there. Amy Coney Barrett actually was on the wrong side of another case at the Supreme Court just last week. It was an EPA case out of San Francisco, California. She sided with the liberals there. I don't really know exactly what her problem is. I mean, I will say this. Amy Coney Barrett did not have much of a track record. If you go back there, she was an academic. She was a constitutional law professor at Notre Dame for about a decade and a half. And if I'm being very, very candid and blunt here, she was not even a particularly prolific law professor. If you go back and actually look at the scholarship that she published, it was kind of few and far between. She was not a particularly prolific writer, and that which she published was not exactly kind of blazing stuff. It was pretty run-of-the-mill scholarship. Amy Coney Barrett also barely served on the Seventh Circuit. She was only on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals for a year and a half, 2 years before she was elevated to the Supreme Court. Here's my take on Amy Coney Barrett above all, Jesse. Here's what happened here. I think you'll probably recall this. Back when she was nominated to the Seventh Circuit there was that infamous viral clip with Dianne Feinstein, the late senator from California, saying, "The dogma lives loudly within you," which was an abhorrent thing to say, reeking of anti-Catholic bigotry, anti-religious sentiment in general there. But because Dianne Feinstein chose to say that to this clearly religiously Catholic judge at that point there, Amy Coney Barrett became a folk hero for people on the right. And I think we basically let this viral moment then guide us after Ginsburg passed away 2 years later in 2020. We basically let Dianne Feinstein pick our Supreme Court justice, is essentially what I'm saying there, because of this stupid viral exchange back from her Seventh Circuit confirmation hearing about how the dogma lives loudly within you. But if we had done the homework and done the research there, we would have seen that she's kind of a middling academic back at Notre Dame there who had an okay track record on the Seventh Circuit, nothing particularly exemplary there. Look, she's still young in her career, okay, if we're being a little fair, I guess. She's been there for about 4.5 years. I mean, it's not that young, but I mean, things could change. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic because I'm not there. But you're right. The right, the Republican Party has a massive, massive problem on its hands here when it comes to picking justices in a way that the left simply does not have. It's a topic that I've written a lot about over the years, Jesse. I'm very passionate about this there. The number one thing we have to do is just do the reading. I mean, actually do the homework. Make sure we have a clear, discernible track record. We have to know exactly what we're going to get when it comes to these judicial nominees. Another big thing that I'm passionate about, they need to convince us that they are eager and willing to aggressively change course at the U.S. Supreme Court. So there are various procedural points along SCOTUS procedure that you can basically choose to be timid. So for instance, you can choose not to vote to grant cert and to hear a case. You can choose to dismiss a case on Article 3 standing grounds. You can choose to punt on a case because of stare decisis precedent. Amy Coney Barrett, by the way, does all three of those things there. But I want to see a judge who's going to grant cert in the hard cases, who's going to overturn those flawed precedents, stare decisis notwithstanding, who's not going to find some stupid Article 3 standing escape hatch, kind of like what they did in the Murphy versus Missouri case, the big tech case last summer, where Barrett and Kavanaugh decided to go out on this stupid standing argument there. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm hoping to see better results this time around. Neil Gorsuch, for what it's worth, he's a little bit better than Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. He's still not amazing, but he's better than those two there. But we need more Clarence Thomases and more Sam Alitos, not Amy Coney Barretts.
Gosh, we do. Why can't we just clone Clarence Thomas a couple times? Gosh, that would be wonderful. Okay, Josh, let's shift gears from all this stuff. The Epstein stuff has people up in arms every single day, and I understand why they're up in arms. I want all the criminals to be brought to justice as well, but I've explained to my audience many times, there are legal concerns here that make it not quite as simple as just throwing something onto Twitter, right? Just because somebody flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet doesn't make them some kind of child trafficking monster. So explain what you think is going on with all this.
Right. So there's a lot that cannot necessarily be easily redacted. I mean, there are genuine privacy concerns when it comes to the kind of people that you described there. But more generally speaking, there, you know, if you were a witness, if you decided to turn state evidence there, and you took some sort of immunity deal whereby you had your privacy shielded in protection for cooperating with federal or in this case state prosecutors in Palm Beach County, Florida. There's all sorts of reasons why it's not just as easy as kind of snapping your fingers and flipping a switch and getting all the names out there. Jesse, my candid take on what happened here is I think that Donald Trump probably overpromised, and he set himself up for under-delivering there. He talked a big game about this on the campaign trail there, but there's frankly just not a whole lot of goods at this point that can be divulged to the public in unredacted fashion there. So he kind of put Pam Bondi and Kash Patel in a potentially difficult place. Again, we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe some files can actually still be redacted and see the light of day there, but I'm not sure exactly how much wiggle room Pam Bondi and Kash Patel actually have at this point.
Josh, I can't let you go without asking about your book, Israel and Civilization. Of course, it's coming out soon. Do you think you have a snowball's chance in hell of surpassing the Anti-Communist Manifesto, one of the greatest novels ever written?
Jesse, I would be honored to be even in the same category, my friend, as the Anti-Communist Manifesto there. You know, I mean, I don't think the New York Times bestseller list is necessarily looking at people like Jesse Kelly or Josh Hammer and salivating and putting them on the bestseller list. I hope I'm wrong about that, by the way, there, obviously. But look, I mean, more generally, Jesse, I'm very excited about this book. It comes out March 18th. Make sure to pre-order if you have not already done so, of course. Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation, the Destiny of the West. Calling ultimately, Jesse, for a Jewish, Christian, nationalist, biblical alliance to defeat the forces of wokeism, Islamism, and global neoliberalism. A rather timely argument, if I don't say so myself.
I dig it, my friend. I am sure it will do quite well. Israel and Civilization. Go order Josh's book. You hear how smart he is. Josh, my brother, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. It'll probably outsell mine. I'm mad about that. I'm not mad about Pure Talk, though. You see, I may not have any money coming in from book sales, but I pay half of what I used to pay for my cell phone, so that's something. See, we had T-Mobile, 4 lines, me, Ob, the boys. We paid a lot. It was a lot. And I was always just kind of floored by it. I think it was something like $248, something crazy, a month. And then I find out about Pure Talk. Now, when I first found out about Pure Talk, I found out it was the patriotic mobile company. Their CEO, Vietnam veteran, that automatically, as you know, means so much to me. So I started digging into it. When they give back, they give back to veterans. And then I find out I can pay way less, and they're on the same 5G network. Why wouldn't I switch? Why wouldn't you switch? Switch to Pure Talk. Keep your phone, keep your number. Or with a qualifying purchase, brand new iPhone 14s or Samsung Galaxies, whatever you want. puretalk.com/Jesse TV. We'll be back.
The proper role of scientists in a pandemic is to answer basic questions that policymakers have about what the right policy should be. they're not. Our role isn't to make decisions to say you shouldn't be saying goodbye to your grandfather as he's dying in a hospital. It shouldn't be to say you can't have a funeral because it's too dangerous. You should. The scientists should say, here's what the risks are, and then you decide what the risk, whether you take it. The role of the scientists shouldn't be to say you can't send your kids to school for 2 years. That you can't you should close hospitals so that they can't treat heart attack patients. That you should not the role of scientists should be to address those problems by giving good data, and then let people make the science should be an engine for freedom, knowledge and freedom, not something where it stands on top of society and says you must do this, this, and this, or else. It shouldn't be pushing mandates for vaccines that have been. Like the COVID vaccines that were tested for for a relatively short period of time. I took the COVID vaccine myself, but I think that the mandates that many scientists push have led to the lack of confidence that so many of the public has in science. If science is a force for freedom and for knowledge, it will have universal support. That's what the role of science is.
I love Jay. I can't believe he's there. I'm so excited about it. Joining me now, Dr. Simone Gold, author of the book Selective Persecution. Dr. Jay is a friend of the show, and it does my heart well to see him there, although I will admit my blood pressure is going through the roof just reliving all the evil crap that was done to us during COVID in this country.
Oh my gosh, Jesse, thank you. Yes, I'm friends with Jay as well, and I hadn't seen it yet, so thank you. I'm glad to have seen it. He's exactly right. If science is based on good science, good facts, good information, and we present it to people, most people will love to follow those recommendations. It will be very few who don't, but we didn't see that during COVID. We saw inaccurate methodologies, we saw rushed processes, and we saw forced heavy decisions, a heavy hand on forcing people to do what the government wanted. So I'm glad to hear him say all of the opposite of that. And the American people will be much better served with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya as directing the NIH.
Yeah, they sure will. Doctor, can you help me understand, in your own words, the why about whatever you just said, about all those things you just said? Why were things rushed? Why was it so different? I mean, why did we turn so tyrannical all of a sudden? Because prior to COVID, most Americans, the vast majority, had such a high opinion of America's medical institutions and doctors and things like that. And you look at public opinion polls now, it's not good. Why? How did they blow it all so badly?
Thank you. That's such an important question. So, first of all, yes, being a physician is a very honorable thing to do with one's life. My father was a doctor. Doctors all over the world, they go on mission trips. We really just want to help people. You're really not attracted to that as a profession if that's not your orientation. So what has gone wrong in the medical system? We have moved completely away from the doctor-patient relationship. So I have noticed that really every year of being a doctor in comparison to my father's time. You know, I grew up with a dad. I used to go with him to the hospitals and the nursing homes, and we had an office in our house. I know exactly how medicine used to be practiced. It was very much the focus on the patient. The patient would need something or have a question or need some help, and my dad would be there for the patient. That was the basis of the whole relationship. And we've moved away from that year after year after year. There's tremendous financial incentives to corporatize medicine because there's a lot of money to be made by people who are not doctors and people who are not patients. So we started getting away from the doctor as small business owner, and we made the doctor just an employee, just a widget in kind of a big machine. I actually call it the medical industrial complex, which is a combination of legacy healthcare, like the big insurance companies, and big pharma. So that's really the legacy healthcare system. And there's so much money to be made by people all along the way that the doctor-patient relationship has really been lost. And actually, for me as a doctor, it's pretty heartbreaking. Now, I fought this as long as I could. In the system, I was very much an insider. I was working in the ERs for over 20 years, board-certified emergency physician. And I saw the encroachment of the payers and the Medicare and the policies, but I always did what I needed to do for the patient in front of me, right? I'd work around the system. I'd find little cheats, little workarounds, right? But during COVID, the government made it impossible for me to take care of the patient. They made it impossible. Specifically, the California Medical Board threatened me and all doctors in California that if I prescribed early treatment medicine for a patient, I could lose my doctor's license. This was unheard of, unprecedented, totally illegal, outrageous. And as you know, I'm a lawyer, and I really responded as a lawyer would respond. And I said, no, hell no, you are not going to tell me what I can and can't do as a doctor. I'm licensed as an individual. We are not licensed as a corporation. We're licensed as individuals. And that was when I saw that the infrastructure for medical tyranny was just totally embedded in our system, right? Because to be a doctor, I needed to have my medical license. And the people giving me my medical license, granting me my medical license, were state bureaucrats who were telling me I couldn't actually practice. That was part of the tyranny. Another part were the payers, right? Medicare. If you had Medicare and you went into the hospital with COVID, the hospital got more money if they put you on remdesivir than if they put you on ivermectin. They actually got thousands of dollars more. They couldn't give you ivermectin and not give you remdesivir and take all those extra payments. So Medicare policies were set. So the hospitals were being financially incentivized by Medicare to do things that were not in the patient's interest. And these are just some of the problems that we face. There was big pharma, legacy media, the healthcare insurance industry. Really, it's quite difficult. So that this is my mission is to free the patient from kind of the medical industrial complex.
Yeah. Speaking of that complex, Dr. Marty Makary, hopefully our new head of the FDA, here he was.
Do you think we need to evaluate the people on the committees or see whether they get royalties or see whether or not there are conflict of interest for the people making these decisions?
Yes, I do, Senator. We need to review the ethics policy because people see things that appear to be a cozy relationship between industry and the regulators that are supposed to be regulating the products. Now, I want American companies to thrive. I want life sciences companies to thrive, but we need to call balls and strikes and to keep that independent scientific review process free of any conflicts. So I do think it deserves a look.
Doctor, the FDA, how much work can Dr. Marty do? Because he's got a whole spider web to untangle. You touched on some of it already.
There's so much to do at the FDA. I want to orient your viewers and you to kind of a big way to look at it. So during COVID, one of the ways I knew that the government was lying is they were saying that this safe drug, hydroxychloroquine, wasn't safe. Now, and they were saying that it wasn't effective. So the FDA was in the business of safety and efficacy. And I submit to you, they should not be in the efficacy business. That safety is the only business the FDA should be in. The FDA should have the right to say, this drug can't come to an American market unless we deem it safe. I think that's a valid role for an honest government. What is not valid for the government is to put its thumb on the scale of what is effective. It turned out the government was incentivized by big pharma to say hydroxychloroquine wasn't effective. So when they started talking about that, people were listening. It happened to be false, but they were suppressing us from bringing the data to that it was effective. But if we took a step back and the FDA wasn't allowed to even comment on efficacy, but only on safety, that in and of itself would be a huge improvement. I don't need a nanny state deciding for me what's most effective. I'd rather either do the research myself or find an honest doctor who can help me do that. When they are given the permission to say this is effective or that's not effective, this is where we run into trouble. This is why inexpensive treatments are often not being released to the public. Ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole, those things appear, and Laetrile, appear to be effective for cancer treatments. But you're having the FDA say, oh, it's not effective. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in the FDA's opinion on efficacy. I really hope Dr. Makary just looks at it from that position, that the FDA, the government, should not be in that business. Let the free market decide what's effective. Isn't that an interesting idea?
Do you view it, obviously it's conflict of interest, but how do we get big pharma reps off of the FDA? It's this endless tunnel back and forth where they'll leave this and they'll go there, then they'll come back here. It's this whole ugly system where everybody's incentivized to just take care of the big pharma companies. Can we break that up?
Yeah, this is a really difficult problem because people work for the FDA and then they leave the FDA position and then they go work for big pharma, and they know that in advance when they're sitting on their FDA jobs. So a lot of people left. Steve Hahn is the one I remember the most. He left the Trump administration. He then went on to become the head of the financial arm of Moderna. And this just happens all the time. This is called regulatory capture, where the big pharma industry is capturing or controlling the regulatory agency that's supposed to be supervising it. It's a huge, huge problem. Listen, Bobby Kennedy is very aware of this as a problem. This was a big subject in his book. So he knows of the problem, and we hope for the best. We have the right leadership to try to unwind this regulatory capture, and let's hope we do.
Dr. Gold, you were awesome. Come back soon. I appreciate you very much. That lady was awesome. All right. Lighten the mood. Next. All right. It is time to lighten my mood, and very little lightens my mood like waking up every day and finding out which new and horrific way Jasmine Crockett chose to embarrass the Democrat Party with. Here she was talking about Trump sending black people back to the fields.
And as they have decided to go after immigrants and these and things like that, and they've said, oh, they taking your black jobs. They taking your black jobs. Not really. They are obviously jobs that they want us to go back to, such as work in the fields, all right? Those immigrants that come into our country, they work the fields, something that we ain't done in a long time. And clearly, he is trying to make us go back to the fields.
She continues to write the GOP ads for them. And Jasmine, I'm behind you. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.